We're going to start with the fabulous Debra Cushing, who's over there. She's wonderful. She is a Fancy Pants Associate Professor from the School of... You are Fancy Pants, that's fancy. From the School of Architecture, fancy schmancy. From the School of Architecture and the Built Environment in the Faculty of Engineering at QUT, so she's come down from Queensland. This is her first time in Canberra, by the way. And for gap filler, so, you know, they're just orienting themselves to the differences. Anyway, and she is going to, so she is an expert in designing health-promoting environments, and she will share with us key principles of design for wellbeing. And excitingly, I also discovered, because I already locked you in to speak, and then realised that you'd written, and it just came off the press, a book called, with your co-author, called Redesigning the Unremarkable. And so we actually get to hear about that today, which is wonderful. So, yay.
Thanks, Kat. Thank you for that great introduction. I don't think I'm fancy pants, but not in my real life. So to start with, I want to acknowledge the Ngunnawal traditional owners and thank you for the welcome from this morning. And I also want to acknowledge the Turrbal and Yagara people as the First Nations owners of the lands in Brisbane, where I did most of the research and wrote the book. And a lot of the photos that I actually show are from Brisbane, so I do want to acknowledge their contributions to our community, past, present, and future. So this is the book, so it's called Redesigning the Unremarkable. It is a little bit about health and well-being. Well, that is one of the areas. It's also about sustainability, and it's about playable design. So there's 3 areas. I did focus a little bit in this presentation on the playable aspects. But I do want to acknowledge, and one of the things that has come out just in the short time today is the importance of collaboration. So my collaborator on this book is actually Professor Yvonne Miller, and she's a design psychologist, environmental psychologist, and so me from landscape architecture and the built environment, and so we work together really well and think about how we can design our public spaces or our built environment to be more health promoting, and how those spaces actually affect people and how they can affect the built environment. So it was a good collaboration. So that's something I've actually heard and I've really appreciated about this conference so far. So why the unremarkable? It's a little bit hard to see that one, but so basically great design. We don't want to hold it just for those huge infrastructure projects. Like Brisbane is actually working on the 2032 Olympics and Paralympic Games right now. So there's so much talk about all these really great infrastructure projects that they want to do. But it's all those underused spaces, those sort of leftover spaces that can be bland, that can be boring, that can actually be dangerous in some cases. And we really want to focus on quality design for those spaces. So the neglected elements and spaces. And what we did is we kind of selected elements and spaces in the built environment that we see every day. So they're part of, you know, the places that we live, work, and play. All right, so it is about designing an experience, although what I'll focus on is the actual design of those elements and spaces, not necessarily the activation, a lot of what we heard this morning, and the activities, but it is about designing an experience. So we have different elements and focus on, you know, benches, trash bins, so those really sometimes mundane, but really ordinary, unremarkable things that we have that we see every day. So parking lots, underpasses, that's one of my favorites because that's really the leftover space, the sort of places we don't design. Spending time in shopping malls, going places, so multi-use trails, those places that we actually use all the time. So the premise of the book is if we really transform those bland, boring, broken spaces and elements and really make you know, sometimes simple, although sometimes complex changes, but really thoughtful and creative changes in how we design those, we can actually really create, you know, we can change how we use our environment, we can create more remarkable experiences for people, and that in turn can actually change their health and well-being. So sometimes it's a direct change or direct impact, like getting people to be more active or taking the stairs. And sometimes it can be indirect in how, reducing trash on the street, so it's how we feel about our space, it's how, is in play, like how we enjoy our spaces. So if we ask ourselves why, so design is actually never neutral. So we always have an agenda, whether you're a designer or you're a community member, there's always something that's happening. So urban elements and spaces really have unlimited potential that we want to exploit that potential. And what we really wanted to do, so the book is actually written for not just designers, but it's actually anybody who uses their community to really rethink about those ordinary and bland elements and how we can actually question how they're designed and why they look the way they do. Because there was an agenda, and sometimes that agenda was that somebody didn't care, unfortunately. So we did hear a lot about, we heard a little about, DIY urbanism, or sort of community members sort of taking things into their own hands and actually making changes in the built environment. And so we do talk a little bit about that in the book. But we also talk about those projects that, and we use them as examples, but projects that really are done sort of with proper planning by professional designers, with government approvals and permits and things. So we do a little bit of both. And this, I don't know how well you can see it. So the sign there is actually just some community members, one of my friends actually, created their own street sign to say, drive slowly, children are playing here, as you've probably seen some of those official signs. And then just an underpass with some nice friendly graffiti. So, as I mentioned, the book actually focuses on sustainability and salutogenic, which is health-promoting environments, but also playable design. And so we really wanted to focus on that innate need to explore our environments, to discover, to experiment, to test. So a lot of the things that we're hearing about, that we've heard about this morning, and really test our physical and mental boundaries and kind of promote that health and well-being. So not to get too academic, but there was an underpinning for this work, and there's 3 theories that we focused on. So the first is called broken window theory, and I didn't come up with any of these, but it's really that idea that those sort of, when there's elements of kind of disuse or a broken window, litter, graffiti, those kind of elements in our environment, it actually sends a cue or a message, and we actually feel like that is not cared for, that environment's not cared for. So the idea is if there's one broken window, it's actually going to encourage more people to sort of throw the baseball and break the other windows in that abandoned building. So it actually it's a really important theory in how we care for our urban environment and the psychological messages that it sends. So on the flip side of that is this theory called cues to care, and it's actually written by Joan Nassar, who's a landscape architect in the U.S. And so it was around ecological restoration, because there would be a lot of backlash on sort of when we're cutting down trees in a prairie environment or something like that, and people didn't understand what was happening. So the idea is that you can actually design in different cues in the project to make sure that people understand that there is care happening, there's maintenance, whether it's in progress, whatever happening. But in our urban environment, we can actually use that to show that, this is an important community, somebody cares about this, somebody's taking care of it. So it's how we can use that in our designing of these different spaces and elements that we focused on. And then finally, and this is sort of separate, but nudge theory. So it's this, and this is actually getting quite popular these days. Nudges are all around us. So one simple nudge, and a nudge is actually something that encourages a healthy option or a healthy choice. So one example that they use in the literature is that, where we place or what we place in the supermarket checkout line actually encourages us to buy. So if it's candy bars, that's what we're going to be nudged to buy. If it's apples and nuts and water, that's what we'll be encouraged. So it's that nudge, it's that decision. Somebody made a decision of what to put in that. So one of the things is even just like the placement of the staircase. So I'm really impressed with this building, because oftentimes you have the staircase behind the blank gray door. You don't even know if you're supposed to go in there. It's not inviting, and in all the movies you see, the horror movies, if you go into that staircase, you're in trouble. So, Yeah, so even the placement of a welcoming, kind of bright, cheerful, sunny staircase is actually a nudge to get, I mean, a lot of us were walking up those stairs, so that is a nudge. So that's what we use sort of as the underpinnings of this book. So different examples. So signs, it can be a simple sign at the point of choice. So when you're making that choice, take the elevator or take the stairs, you might see a sign that says burn calories, not electricity, and it encourages you to use the stairs. A famous example of a nudge, a playful nudge, is the piano stairs, and that was the Fun Theory campaign, and they worked with Volkswagen, a very expensive, extremely expensive one-day experiment, but it was done in Sweden, in a subway station, and they encouraged, or it actually resulted in 66% increase in stair use for the day that they did it. So it's actually a really successful, and that's one of the things is that we have to have the research to show that impact sometimes, and so yeah, a really successful example of a nudge to get people to take the stairs. So now I'm going to go through, I'm not going through all of them in the book, so don't worry, but a few different examples of those different elements, and remember I'm focusing on the design of those rather than the activation or the programming of how we can get people to do it. It's more about the actual design. But so I go through a few of the elements and spaces that we have in the book. So the first is trash bins. So I think we all know this. As a society, we produce quite a lot of waste, and oftentimes we don't actually see it. It's sort of, we throw it away and then it's gone, and we actually don't have to think about it. So if we can actually use the design or redesign of those trash bins, recycling bins, with a nudge to actually encourage people to reflect on how much trash they're producing, and then hopefully, ideally, change that behavior. So I'm just going to give some examples. So humor, sometimes, well, research does say that if there's fear, and a lot of people have fear about the environment or about, kind of what we're doing and sort of the climate change and that kind of thing. If we can use humor, it actually can sometimes help with address that fear. So these are some trash bins that were designed by Kristen Hardy. And just using, cute little quotes or things to, urge people to think about, what they're doing. So, why, of course, I'm not trashy, my dear, I recycle. So just kind of like little sayings. This is actually really interesting. So this is the gumdrop bin. I was walking around last night, and there's a lot of gum on the streets here. And there is everywhere, so it's not just Debra. But so the gumdrop bin is something that was designed by this organization, and they actually encourage people to recycle their chewing gum, and that structure, that container, is actually made from recycled chewing gum. And they've also made gum boots and mobile phone cases and packaging, all kinds of things. And actually in the UK, they've done a school initiative where they've asked, what will your gum become? And have children actually come up with different things that they could create with a recycled chewing gum. So again, it's getting us to stop and reflect on, Actually, I'll never throw out my gum because when I was a kid, they always said that the squirrels would swallow the gum and die. So I'll never throw my gum on the ground again. Okay, so then this is quite popular. I'm sure you've seen this or kind of thought of this before. But it's throwing trash or recycling using sort of basketball or other games. So they might have a hopscotch or something like to encourage people to be active. Again, sort of a direct relationship to health and well-being, because getting people more physically active, but also in a playful way. All right, so the next one is just sitting down, benches and chairs. And this is one area that actually, public seating is quite important. It's everywhere. And oftentimes it's just chosen out of a catalog, like a furniture catalog, with no thought given, or it's in disrepair, or it's not placed appropriately. So there's all kinds of things that happen. But it actually, when it's well designed, when it's well placed, it really can help us build social connections. There's There's lots of initiatives like Friendly Bench and chat, that you can meet somebody else on a bench. But it also gives sort of permission, and it enables people to be part of that community life. And it's happened over time, because even in the Roman times, where they placed the seating around their public arenas or things, allowed people to watch and be part of that community. So it's actually quite important, and there's quite a lot of potential. So this is one where it's, again, a little bit more playful. This is called Swing Time in Boston. It was actually meant to be a temporary installation, and it's one of those temporary installations that sort of has a life of its own and sort of is so popular that they keep it there. And they've changed it and updated it and things like that. So this is, in Boston, like I said, and so they used LED lights that can be nighttime and daytime, and so when the swings are in action, they actually change colors, and so it is a little bit interactive, and it encourages, again, it's a nudge to get people to move with the swing, or even just try it, and it's sort of social connections is what it's building. This is actually, these sculptural benches, they're actually created from recycled propane tanks. So this is an artist out of California, Colin Selig, and so they're pretty much indestructible. So they can be climbed on, colorful, designed in a way that actually can enhance that sense of place if you want to design in sort of native animals or things like that in the design. So again, another colorful, playful way to actually help build kind of health and well-being in the sense of social engagement and social connections. Stairways, again, I mentioned the stairways, and I showed the piano stairs. Stairways are quite important, and they're everywhere, and we can't be without them, right? So when I was doing the research for that chapter of the book, I was actually quite fascinated with how much symbolism is in a stairway. So they evoke curiosity, so we always, we see a staircase and we wonder what's at the top, where can we get to? We use it as sort of a metaphor to obtain something or to reach, higher level in our careers or, whatever it is, obtain power. But they also really provide opportunities for being physically active, like we're always encouraging people to take the stairs as a very simple way to get more activity in your life. But if they're not designed properly, if they're behind a door, if they're hidden, they can be dangerous. There can be mobility obstacles. They do need to be designed properly, so there is some restrictions and regulations for good reason, because they can be dangerous. So this is in Helsinki. This is just a library, not just a library, it's an important library, I should say that. And it's the black and white spiral staircase. And the words on this, I don't know if you can see that, you can't see the words, but those little white kind of slashes are words, and they've actually, during the design process, the words were collected from community members. So it was a little bit engaging, but also as a way to encourage you to take the stairs rather than the elevator or the whatever else is the other option in this building. It's a way to engage people and to be curious and add something that's a little bit playful. So this is in Singapore. My colleague took this photo. It's just, again, using a simple decal to get people to think about being more active, and it might not necessarily kind of nudge you to take the stairs, but to think about how much physical activity you're getting. And then this, again, some of these are a little bit more simple DIY. This was not. This was a little bit more explicit. I forget who designed this, but the Cascade Project in Hong Kong. So this took a bland concrete staircase in Hong Kong and actually made it a community space. So now it's a social space night and day. Because they sort of dressed up, they added some kind of lighting and some geometric kind of features to this. So some interest there. The next was fences and walls, so this idea of blocking out. So fences and walls can actually keep us in, and they can actually be good for security or safety. So they are an important feature, and they can also keep people out, both unintentionally and intentionally. But they also come with a lot of again, sort of that idea of gated community, it can be a very political or social kind of factor, I think, and they can communicate a lot. So there's a lot in sort of this idea of fences and walls. And because they are everywhere, they actually have a huge amount of potential because they can be a blank canvas in some sense. Interestingly, when I was doing the research, so just a fun fact, in Canada actually they have 2 times the linear feet of fence that they do have of roads. So it's this infrastructure that we actually don't even think about, but because it's also vertical, it blocks. So you can cross a road pretty easily. You can't cross a fence very easily. So it's really quite impactful in our physical built environment. But it's often not regulated actually. So a lot of times, you know, the design of a road is very regulated, or the design of a bridge, you know, other infrastructure. But a fence, sometimes yes, but sometimes not. So it's quite important. So this is actually an example in Brisbane, but so just a playable kind of making a musical instrument out of a simple railing. So rather than just put an ugly, you know, it doesn't have to be ugly, but just a standard railing, why not make it actually a play element in your environment? Then we did talk about yarn bombing. Kate mentioned yarn bombing, but I think yes, as a sort of an activity and an experience, but also if you think about what you're applying that yarn bombing to. So taking a chain link fence, which, you know, chain link fences are generally fairly bland and ugly, and actually making something that's a little bit more special. And then finally, this is my last one, so underpasses. So, and again, I was fascinated with this one when I was doing the research because it is almost truly the sort of leftover space of our environment. I mean, you could also say the gaps and the things like that that sort of come up. But as an infrastructure that we've actually planned out, we sort of didn't plan what's underneath. All the focus is on top, right? And so it becomes this either underused or derelict or you know, dark, damp, kind of forgotten space. Again, we do reference a lot of pop culture, so movies and things, it's always the underpass that's where, you know, the homeless people are living, they're, you know, they have the fire in the bin, that kind, you know, we can have a mental picture of what this means. It's a place we avoid in our urban environment. And that can actually, it can not only be dangerous, but it can also raise anxiety and fear, and we actually avoid those places. But again, there's a huge amount of potential in an underpass. So this is Burnside Skate Park. It actually was a DIY skate park. It was sort of started the movement of DIY skate parks. It was actually constructed in 1990, and it was just a group of skateboarders who actually built a concrete wall. And then they didn't get permission, so they didn't get any permits or anything, and it has just taken off. And actually, you can look this up. It's got its own Wikipedia page. It's so, it was so successful. So again, an underpass, an underused area. It was a sort of parking lot, and one of the spaces, I don't discuss it today, but one of the spaces in the book is a parking lot, and so, you know, how we can redesign some of those spaces as well. This is the Rainbow Tunnel. It's actually in Toronto. You can actually see it from a big highway, but it's on a multi-use trail. And it was actually done quite a while ago, 1971, by a guerrilla mural artist. And it was sort of in memory of a friend of theirs that died on the trail. And it's actually been painted over and repainted and painted over and repainted. So there's obviously been some tension between whether it should be allowed or not, but it has survived, and obviously people find it important. And other school groups have added to that in the center of the tunnel. But it's just a lively, fun, kind of colorful way to improve what, you know, we've seen lots of those, right? They're just like concrete tunnels, and, you know, sometimes they're not so pleasant to go through. This is actually the final example I have. So this is the Silly Walks Tunnel in the Netherlands, and it's actually part of the City's Smile Factor initiative, where they've actually tried to get people to have more fun in their community. And if you're a Monty Python fan, I'm sure this could be an area you want to go to. But it gets people, it sort of gives permission for people to actually do different things and walk in different ways. And I'm sure it's an Instagram kind of moment, and lots of different things, but again, it's just getting people active and having fun, and where this could be a dull, bland, sort of forgotten underpass, this is something different. So basically, why we need to redesign, so the public elements are playful urban spaces and elements that really encourage all ages, so not just kids, but everyone, to smile, laugh, challenge themselves, connect with others, and really challenge ourselves and be physically active, and simply enjoy the places that we actually spend so much of our time. So again, one of the premises was that it's not just about the big design, the showcase, big spending, kind of, everyone's looking. It's actually, and what we say in the book is actually we want to lower our gaze to those places that we use every day, those unremarkable elements and spaces, and how we can actually use those to our advantage. It doesn't have to cost a lot. Sometimes they are quite expensive, and sometimes you do need sort of careful planning, but a lot of times it can actually be something simple. So that's all I have.